Last year, I made two major animated projects, the Artificer vs Chieftain Scavenger animation and the Inn of Dating Sim series. Both of these are animated adaptations of events in Rainworld's Downpour DLC. I love adapting media I like into animation because all my original ideas are probably a bit too out there for the average person to handle or enjoy, and I'm not that brave yet. But, as you can maybe tell, I enjoy Rainworld quite a bit. I started playing it back in the summer of 2022, and while I love the DLC to bits, Survivor remains my favorite campaign. While working on my Inn series, I came to the realization that for how much I like the base game, all my major projects tend to be Downpour-centric. I decided I want to do something with the base game and keep it mostly canon compliant. I will show the resulting animation towards the end of this video in full, as well as upload it as its own separate video in a day or two, but I worked on this project for a little over 2 months, and it is the longest standalone animated project I have ever made, so it would be appreciated if you just wait for a moment and allowed me to explain some of my creative process. Don't go. The main reason why a lot of my animations are quite short is because I like animating a lot. By which I mean that I like adding lots and lots and lots of frames, lots of shots, lots of action, lots of little details. Sometimes I add so much that the animation becomes difficult to follow. I call this the multi-animator project syndrome. But looking back, some of the fandom projects that are most memorable to me personally are actually very economical with their frames, using only a few drawings a shot. And then we have media like Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I watched due to extreme peer pressure, in which they can go half a minute or longer without ever changing the drawing on screen, basically just letting the dialogue do most of the carrying. I saw these scenes and I was awestruck, because this is like the opposite of what I always do. So I set on a task of making an animation while fighting my urge to make lots of frames and lots of really short shots. I settled on a scene where Slugcat brings Lux the Moon a pearl, which she then reads while we get some flashback scenes, etc, etc. Simple enough. This concept felt ideal because Moon is kinda just sitting in place most of the time, so I wouldn't have to do any super complex animation if I didn't want to. Also, she has no mouth, so I don't have to animate lip sync either. The scene felt ideal for making an animation that wouldn't have that much animation. Now, whether I actually succeeded in carrying out this plan of not animating much is an entirely different thing, but we'll get to that later. I started out by making a storyboard, which I would mostly stick to later on. As usual, my storyboards aren't really intended to be understood by anyone other than myself. I think that's pretty clear from looking at them. I then wanted to figure out the character designs, a part of the process that I've usually just kind of skipped before. It is often easier and therefore faster to draw a character in a way that intuitively comes to you. But this time around, I knew I wanted my animation to be canon compliant, sort of, and as a part of that, I wanted to stick closer to the official art. Designing the Slugcat was easy enough. I've animated Skugs a lot in the past, and the art in the game is always very simple. I just adjusted my usual way of drawing them a little bit to make them look more animal and less sapient. In the Inf series, it made sense to draw them in this cartoony kind of way, give them mouths and all, and in the Artificer animation I was also doing something similar, since Artificer sort of has a lot of agency in their story, but I feel like the Slugcats in the base game are less anthropomorphic than those in Downpour. Inv especially is like basically a furry, and I wanted to move away from that for now. These are the kinds of things you need to take into account when designing characters. Aside from making the Slugcat more animalistic, the only notable design choice was to give them disappearing limbs. I already do this a lot in my Slugcat art, but I still needed to make the decision of whether I would double down on that for this animation. The Slugcats in the game and the official art will only have limbs when it is required for an action or a pose. When not in use, the limbs just kind of disappear back into the body, they get consumed. This actually makes animating them a lot easier, and I think it's funny, so I decided to keep it. Canon compliance. As for designing Moon, I have drawn iterators a lot before, Moon especially, but I haven't really animated them much at all. Aside from like a few occasions. What this means is that I don't really know how any of this is supposed to work. I started making turnarounds of Lux the Moon's head using this specific art as my general point of reference because I think it looks nice. Rainworld's official art of iterators isn't really very consistent between different pieces, which is fine. It only becomes a little bit of a problem when trying to come up with canon compliant character designs. Another issue I was facing is that my brain cannot comprehend the shape of what I will be calling iterators Iterator headphones. I knew I wanted to have some shots with cool perspective in my animation, but when I tried drawing the headphones from fun and interesting angles, I quickly found out that I cannot do that yet. After ripping out my hair for a couple of days, I crawled to tumblr.com and went, hey, could someone make me a model of Looks of the Moon's headphones so that I can rotate them in Blender instead of dying? Thank you. And I got a response almost immediately. Thank you, Art of MLA, for saving my life. I originally intended to just use this model as a reference when working on some of the shots with unusual angles, but I kinda just started using it as a crutch instead. I either referenced or traced the model for every single shot where Moon's head is visible. I also used it for the rare appearances of 5 pebbles, just adjusting it a little bit. And by adjusting it, I don't mean that I edited the model, because I still don't know how to do that. The issue I have with 3D extends to trying to learn Blender. I have tried multiple times and it always makes me want to cry. I'm the kind of person who gets lost in Minecraft every 5 minutes because I cannot comprehend anything that isn't a 2D platformer. Using the 3D model was actually great for keeping the animation consistent, although I do somewhat mourn some of the expressions in my storyboards. Trying to keep Moon on model ended up eating some of the emotion I originally had on her. But the in-game Iterator puppets aren't that expressive either, so call it canon compliance. Moon's head unfortunately wasn't the only part I ended up having problems with. The rest of her puppet body I was fine with, but the can itself, in which most of the animation takes place in, turned out to be very difficult for my brain to comprehend. So the distances between objects as well as the sizes are probably a little scuffed. In hindsight, I could have also asked someone for a model of an Iterator can, or literally just a cube, to help me out. But I only realized that this was a problem when I was already kind of far into the project, so well, at least it's still not that noticeable to me, because I don't know how 3D works. So, as mentioned before, I was trying to animate with less frames. There's this one strategy used in TV animation where the in-betweeners literally just stick a frame straight between the keyframes and then they call it a day. It's very economical to just do this and no other frames, but I have used this strategy before and I just don't like the way it looks. I feel like it eats at the physics. In real life, objects will need to build up momentum before reaching their full speed, and they will also need to slow down before stopping, or bounce back, or in the case of Looks the Moon, I gave her these 2 red wires that are attached to the base of her headphones, and since those aren't moving on their own, but rather being dragged behind Moon's head, they will always be moving at a different rate than the rest of the animation. I cannot only use 1 frame while maintaining the physics. But I wanted to be brave, so I still tried just doing one in between for one of my shots. And I hated it so much that I never did it again. Mission failed! I will continue adding lots and lots of frames. I did come up with a strat for doing some of the slowdown/acceleration in-betweens, where I would basically just tweak the keyframes. This worked like a charm, so I'll likely be utilizing this strat in future. If I cannot reduce the frames, then I will reduce the amount of time it takes for me to draw them. So, this animation is fully voice acted. Moon is voiced by Eguka, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who also voiced Moon in East as well as in Spearmaster's Backroom Top Surgery. So this is not the first time I've had voice acting in my animations, although it is the first time I've done an actual recording session instead of just giving people voice lines and fucking off, which I also initially did this time around, but then I came back. Turns out recording sessions are very good for giving live feedback. Eguka did an amazing job. Oh, by the way, she is also the one who improv'd the speech in the April Fool's video. The Among Us reaction is real. Both of us had difficulties moving past that phrase.
I lost my focus because I was thinking about Among Us.
I also animated Lineless for the first time ever. All the water drops and a lot of other background effects were just drawn with the lasso fill tool, which I think turned out nicely. Some of the shots were a bit funky, so I tried to look up references for water on YouTube, but apparently YouTube search just doesn't work anymore. I kept getting shown either re-uploads of the same video over and over again, or for some reason... Huh? So eventually I just resorted to filming my own references as usual. Another way in which this animation was very different from my prior projects is that I actually painted every one of these backgrounds. Typically, when I work on longer projects, I have constructed the backgrounds in post from these little building blocks. But this time around, I knew that the environments would be important, so instead of doing all the animation and then all the backgrounds, I would first finish a background of a particular shot, and only then do the animation. The advantage of painting backgrounds is also that I would be able to control the level of detail while painting. I would basically stop drawing the second that a background looked good enough to me, without adding any extra rendering where it wasn't needed. This let me put less detail in the parts further away from the camera, which I wouldn't have been able to do with the building block strategy. On the other hand, I do think this approach led to some consistency issues between the backgrounds. I already mentioned that I had difficulties with deciding the distance between objects. Aside from that, I think the backgrounds from Moon's collapsed can are mostly fine and very pretty. I blend these backgrounds very carefully, first working to convert the 2D game art to 3D to my best ability, and then using the first background I made as a reference for all the rest. With the other backgrounds, however, like the ones in the flashback scenes, they are inconsistent in both color and detail. The iterator cans, they do change color based on what the iterators are up to, but still. If I were to start over with this project now, I would have probably used the same color palette in all of them. Maybe the one used in the mural earlier in the animation, like these orange and gray and blue colors. I think that could look nice. The backgrounds in these flashback scenes are some of my least favorite ones, but I don't think it's a good use of my time to try doing them over. It is important to move on from details you don't like in favor of getting your work done. Let's talk about the composition a little more. Rainworld's in-game art uses a specific strat for its environments, where they're basically showing an intersection of the space, kind of like an ant farm or a dollhouse. This allows for the characters to always look very small, since the imaginary camera doesn't have to move close to them as it would in real life. I like this effect, and I tried replicating it with mixed success. In this shot here, I wanted Moon to look very small and alone, so in order to really push the desolation, I zoomed way out of her can and kind of just took off its top part, so that the viewer can still see inside. Here and in the following shot, I think the ant farm strat works very well, and it does what I intended it to do. Then there's this other shot of the slug cat sleeping in a shelter, and again, I was trying to use the ant farm strat of removing some of the walls so that you could still see the slug cat inside while the camera is far away. Only this time around, 3 of the walls are equally close to the camera, which I didn't realize was a problem while storyboarding, but it was. So now, instead of showing a cute intersection of the shelter, I have effectively placed the slug cat inside a microwave oven, as many people, including my own mother, made sure to inform me of. But at this point, I would need to change the shot composition in order to make this work, which I don't want to do. So in the microwave, they shall eep. After I was done with animating everything, I added in some audio effects, which I'm still not super proficient in. I tried adding some glitchy stuff to Moon's voice while still keeping it comprehensible, although I am planning to add captions regardless for those who need them. I also added sound effects from the game's files and then recorded some additional ones from the game itself. Only at the time of recording, my game turned out to be a little broken and was apparently enemy randoing Outer Expanse, which is where I was in my current survivor file, so I had to get out of there to go stand in Lux of the Moon's chamber for 7 minutes until me and my family drown. I also had to record a bit on the wall, so I possessed a lizard. Unfortunately, other lizards kept ruining my audio by existing. But why was I recording at the wall for a Lux of the Moon video? Well, I was getting iterator breathing sounds. I put some little details into my animation here and there, even though I said that I wouldn't do that. Originally, I was going to show Sliver as having collapsed, but then I thought about the canon compliance, and came to the conclusion that a dead iterator would probably not collapse immediately. So instead, I made her just not breathe, and made Moon breathe a little bit, and Pebbles breathe a lot. A lot of thought went into this shot, so in hindsight I probably should have made it a little longer. Like, I find the idea that the area around Sliver's can would have been pretty dead and then the vegetation would have spread upon her death very appealing, but this shot lasts for like 5 seconds, so no one's gonna notice that. Ouch. For this project, I took a bit of a slower working pace because I was also working on my thesis and because I care about my well-being. For the Artie vs. Scav Chief animation, I animated 2 shots a day and they generally had quite a lot of animation. For this one, I only did 1 shot a day, and most of them had less animation than the Artie shots did. Some of the shots did end up taking me 2 days to draw, such as this one with 50 frames of clouds. I knew animating clouds would be painful, so I contained them all into this 1 shot. I also slowed my working pace towards the end of the project. Once all the shots were done, I would just kind of slowly chip away at the final editing and fixing minor things. I did it like this because usually when I finish longer projects, towards the very end when I can feel myself being almost done, I start crunching, and then by the time the project is finished, I am ready to perish. But even worse than the crunch is the time immediately after, when this project that used to be a huge part of your schedule is suddenly gone, and you don't know what to do with your life anymore. So yeah, gradually letting go of the project made it less stressful and more nice for me, certainly, so I can honestly say that I am very happy to finally show it off. Here we go.
Oh! Hello, little creature. You're here again. I wonder what it is that you want. Oh, what is that? Ah, you would like me to read this? It's a bit dusty, but I will do my best. Hold on. Interesting. This one is written by me. It's about an iterator called Sliver of Straw. I don't remember when I wrote it. Do you know Sliver of Straw? She's quite legendary among us. Sliver of Straw is the only one to ever broadcast a specific signal. That the big problem we're all working on has been solved. The triple affirmative that a solution has been found, affirmative that the solution is portable, and affirmative that a technical implementation is possible and generally applicable. She's also one of the few that has ever been confirmed as exhaustively incapacitated, or dead. We do not die easily. Sliver of Straw sent this, and the ensuing commotion was historically unparalleled, before or after. I still remember it, but nothing happened, except that Sliver of Straw was apparently dead. When the dust was settled, we were all still there blinking at each other. Everyone had a theory. Some said that she did have a solution, but that the solution itself was somehow dangerous. These later became known as the triangulators, who think that a solution should be inferred without being directly discovered. Some said she never had a solution, she just died, and when the systems broke down an erroneous signal was sent. One camp claimed that dying was the solution. Either way, after that, these different factions developed, as well as a huge forensic effort to recreate and simulate Sliver of Straw's last moments. Some of the simulations were wrapped in a simulation, in case something dangerous might happen. Nothing much has come from it. In my essay, I make the case that maybe she should be allowed to rest in peace now. I think the rain is approaching. You better go, little creature. I will be fine. It's not pleasant, but I've been through it before.
This animation has 615 individual drawings, which I realized is quite a lot for an animation that wasn't supposed to have that much animation in it, but then also this is definitely the longest fully animated project I've ever done, so I think it's a reasonable amount of frames. As I mentioned before, I feel like this animation is almost too fast-paced, teetering on the very edge of being too fast, so I definitely could have made it slower still. Something that I didn't expect was how much the neurons would influence the pace of the animation, since I just added those as GIFs in post, and they ended up filling the shots quite a bit even if there was no other animation going on. I am regardless very proud of this animation. I think some of the shots here are definitely among my favorite pieces of animation I've ever done, and I have learned valuable lessons that will certainly help me animate more efficiently in the future. It's been really fun working continuously on just one project rather than making multiple smaller ones, and I would love to do this again in the future. After a little bit of a break, perhaps. I need to finish my master's thesis. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the future. Bye!